Hello and welcome. I'm Tim and this is TimBatSea. Like any mechanical thing that you want around, periodically you need maintenance. And if you remember a few years ago, we had a major engine overhaul. Now it was time to do our what we call a top end rebuild. What they were doing here was removing some of the cladding, the heat shield going from the cool side of the compressor side of the turbo going into the aftercoolers. Now they're taking some cladding away from the hot side, from where the exhaust spins the turbo. There's a team of 4 guys that come. You'll see each one does one side of one engine. So there's a guy working on this side, a guy working on the other side, and over to the right of the screen you can see some guys working over there. That big blue box is just the electrical distribution panel for the boat. But anyway, these guys make short work of a long project. Some of you, I'm sure, are going to ask how often this needs to be done. And to tell you the truth, we're kind of in the midst of a transition, not just with our company, but the whole industry, or for the most part, for that matter. For years, periodic maintenance was either done when it was needed, or the people, especially in the red flag industry, the people that are hauling hazardous cargo like petroleum products, started following what the airline industry does, where they have set known time intervals where things need to be done, regardless of whether they need it or not. And that's how things have worked at the company that I work for, and that's what generated that it was time to do this top end rebuild. But what's happening is slowly the industry is starting to change to not so much for engine hours, but because all the engines are computer controlled, the computers track all kinds of things, not only just the engine hours, but they also track things like how much fuel was burnt. And in talking with the techs here, I asked him, I said, so what does that mean? How many hours or how many gallons of fuel does it, do you have to burn before it's time to do this? And apparently that's not a static number. The reason why they do it to begin with is because if you say at 10,000 hours we're going to do a top end rebuild, well, a boat that's running it's 100% duty cycle, so a boat that's running full bore with 100% load on it for 10,000 hours is going to wear much differently than a boat that might be at idle or run light tug or do work like we do. We're around New York Harbor, and only half the time we're actually moving a barge, the other time we're going in between jobs and that sort of thing. So the fuel burn will give a more accurate snapshot of what they really need to do. Unfortunately, he couldn't give me an exact number because they're still working on this, and he says that not as they started to change to fuel burn, the requirements in our industry for what fuel we burn. Let me back up and say that on a car you'll have a catalytic converter, and that's dictated by the EPA so that we're less pollutant in the environment. Well, the way we don't have catalytic converters and that sort of thing on marine diesels, but one of the ways that they went to go clean up emissions from medium speed diesels or high speed diesels like these is that they started reducing the sulfur content. And so now, just in the last few years, we've gone to what they call ultra low sulfur, where it used to be, there was high sulfur for a long time, and then they started reducing it more and more. He said as they start reducing the sulfur in the engine, the interval times increase. So in other words, the sulfur was in there. They didn't put it in there just to, or they didn't not remove it just because they wanted to save money. It was also acted, I guess, as a lubricant or some sort of something. I don't know. I'm not a tech. Anyway, that's what they were telling me. So that's what they're going to, and I thought that was kind of interesting. Okay, so I've been talking so much. Should tell you that the first day they you saw them just basically breaking everything down. The second day doesn't look like they're doing much, but it really involves a whole lot of cleaning. And you'll see them taking parts off and cleaning them and putting them on benches, working down on the ground. Now they're bringing those right there on the lower left-hand side. Those are the new heads that they're bringing down. They're going to be putting up. And it's kind of interesting, unlike most engines that I've seen where you have a block and then you put a head gasket and then you put the head on. These actually have gaskets and then a head spacer and then a gasket and then the head on top of that. And then on top of the head they have this little collar thing that holds the electrical connection for the fuel injector, and then they put caps on, that sort of stuff. They also have where the exhaust comes out of the top of the head. They go, because those we have these what they call pyros, where it's a thermometer that measures exhaust temperature, and they measure all that stuff so that my engineer, while we're running, he can see if one cylinder has a higher exhaust temperature than another, and that sort of thing. And that's really so that they can tune. You call the techs back in, and they can, through a computer connection, they can control how much fuel. They control the timing and how the injectors work and all that sort of stuff. So, anyway, those. You'll see when they were putting the exhaust on, there's like a cast piece that goes onto each cylinder head and then goes up, and there's a space in between the next one. And they can't connect those because they all get to well over 1,000 degrees, sometimes up to like 1,200 degrees. And those things get cherry red, and so because of expansion and contraction, there's a series of bellows between each one of those for every cylinder. And you would think that they would replace those when they do a top-end rebuild, until the tech told me that replace it. He said they have to be really careful. They have to clean them out, and they have to be really careful because they're $800 a piece just for that little teeny bellows. But anyway, they're big dollar engines, but they should last a lifetime if they're properly taken care of. And say right here, this is where they most of the stuff they were doing was involving cleaning. Right now he's just putting injectors in right there. And I think we're coming up to the end of day 2. And we're on to day 3. So during day 3, let me just take a pause here and tell you there's a number of things that they're doing when we call it a top-end rebuild, but because they change the heads and that sort of thing, and they clean everything up there. But they also changed the turbos, and there's 2 turbos on each engine, so they changed a total of 4 turbos. They changed the water pumps. And they're all these massive gear-driven things. They change a lot of the vapor recovery thing, where the crankcase ventilators. They change those. They do a lot of cleaning of things that have gotten carboned up or sooted up over time. And they probably do a lot. And they also, the only thing that my engineer and I were concerned with, or I shouldn't say concerned with, but reason why we were looking forward to this top end rebuild is because our aftercoolers, we think we're starting to get plugged, and so they take the old aftercoolers off and they put the new aftercoolers on. And while all this is happening, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's happening. We're not out of water. We're doing this right in the water in Philadelphia. But we have a refrigeration guy on who takes care of our refrigerators and freezers and our HVAC. I had him check out the air conditioner in the upper house because we'll be using that as the temperature gets warmer. We had electronics guys come on and change out a few radios for us. We had other engine and electronic guys working on some of our generators, and another guy working on a shaft and checking the alignment of the shafts. We had all kinds of work being done to the boat. We had our immersion suits had to get recertified. We sent those out, got them recertified, and brought them back. Those are what we call Gumby suits. we had all kinds of stuff, like I said, going on. Anyway, as you can see here, they're putting everything back together again. Got the turbos back on, and they're making progress. I had asked some of the guys some questions that I thought that you guys might be interested in. Anyone that has a boat with a marine diesel in it, I figured maybe this is a good time that we could get some knowledge from these guys that are obviously skilled, trained professionals. So I asked them a few things, and these are some of the answers that I got. One of them, I asked them, after you've laid up your engine, you laid up your boat for the winter, and you go to start it up for the first time in the spring, is there anything you should watch out for? And they told me something I had never considered before, and it makes a lot of sense to me. They said that if you have a mechanical diesel, and what they're saying is mechanical as opposed to a computer-controlled diesel, and a mechanical diesel won't have electric fuel injectors. It will have a fuel rail that will, put the fuel in. He says you should be careful, and you should remove your air cleaner. And sometimes in a marine diesel, an air cleaner won't look like it will on your car. It's just a thing with a metal piece on one side and some holes on the other and that sort of thing. He says remove that, start the diesel up. He says because sometimes your rack can stick because it's been sitting all winter, and when the rack sticks, the engine will, what they call, run away on you. And the only way to shut that off, if you shut the fuel off, it'll take a long time before that happens. You can't, you know how like you used to shut your lawnmower down by putting your hand over the intake? You wouldn't want to do that on a marine diesel because it will suck your hand right through. So if you take the air cleaner off, you can put the air cleaner upside down and put it back in, and it will starve the engine out of fuel. I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. I also asked them what their take was on fuel additives. You know, some people say they put stuff in their fuel, some people say they don't. And I was surprised to learn that these guys said, hey, you know what? I put fuel additives in my diesel truck. So that might be something that you guys might want to think about if that's something that you want to do. But they basically all agreed that the single best thing that we can do is to stay up on regularly scheduled maintenance. I also asked them how important it was to let an engine come up to temperature before putting a load on it. And they all seemed to agree that it was very important that too often diesel will be sitting and be cold. Somebody will start it up like you do a car and start putting a load on it and backing it down, that sort of. So there's nothing wrong with firing it up and letting it run and getting it up to 120, 130, 140 degrees before, then that would be in Fahrenheit obviously, and before you start taking it off. And then if you want to, you don't need to get it all the way up to temperature, but you can run around in what I would call clutch. So you can run it around slow and then slowly add power until it finally comes up to temperature. They seem to think that was something that was quite important. I also asked them a question about how important it is. I think if we read our manuals, it often tells people that they need to get their valve clearances checked. And I think that that's something that the people that hire the boatyard to do a lot of stuff will hire the boatyard and they'll check that, and that's fine, and that's what it's recommended, and that's what you should do. But I think there are a lot of us that don't do that, and I wanted to ask them about that, and I got a really surprising answer. And one of the older guys on the crew who's seen everything and probably had a whole lot of experience, he said that although that is the right thing to do, unfortunately with the technicians that are in the marketplace today, on something like valve timing or valve clearances, you run the risk of doing more damage opening it up to do all that than you did if you just left the valves, whether they be too tight or too loose. And provided if the engine is running good and you've been doing this for 2,000 hours, he said, you know what, with today's diesels, you might want to just leave it be if it's still running good. And I thought that was fascinating. And finally, I asked them about smoke, and they all agreed that smoke at startup is not the worst thing until it comes up to temperature. Very common. Hopefully it won't happen with a newer engine, but with an older engine it will. And as we all should know, blue is indicative of oil, black is indicative of fuel, and white is usually indicative of coolant, but it also could be engine starved of fuel, in other words, running too lean. But they seem to. So in other words, if your engine comes up to temperature and it's smoking and it's really black, you probably have a fuel issue. If you comes up to temperature and it still is running blue, you probably have an oil issue. So anyway, that's it. Hope you guys liked it. Really impressed with how well these guys work together. It was a great week having them on board. Happy to report everything's running great now. All right. Thank you so much. And as always, I'll see you guys on the one.